What's going on with the Wisconsin Badgers basketball team? This is a question we've been asking for a few weeks now, but is a question that I think deserves our continued attention. And I have a few quick thoughts in my mind, something I want to just throw out there. And after taking some feedback from the general Badgers commentariat, I think I'm almost ready to hit that button. But let's talk about it here. Good evening, and thank you for enjoying it with the Six Pack. The Scotty Six Pack, the only podcast talking all things Wisconsin sports with you 6 days a week. I am your host, Kedrick Stumbris, and you can follow me on the website formerly known as Twitter at Kedrick Stumbris, and follow the podcast at Scotty Six Pack for the latest updates in Wisconsin sports. While you're here, leave a nice review, 5 stars, kind comments. Really does help people find the show, and you can also watch us on YouTube, youtube.com/@Scotty6Pack. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button, smash that like button and the bell so you get notified as soon as we put new episodes into your feed. Wisconsin tips off by the time you're hearing this, about an hour and a half from now against the Maryland Terrapins. And I'll address that kind of on the back half of the show here in case you are listening to this after that game has already happened, because I know I'm pushing up against it a little bit. But part of the reason I want to talk about, is it time to panic about Badgers basketball, is because I got a couple of things that are game related to this game against Maryland that I want to talk about. It'll all tie into there. But overall, I think it's important that we continue to talk about the fact that although the Badgers are slipping right now, it doesn't look like it's the best situation at hand necessarily. They still are boasting one of the best resumes in the country, and that's ultimately what matters if you're talking about NCAA tournament seeding. It is a big deal that Wisconsin has as many quality wins as Wisconsin does, and I've been talking about that over and over again. This was kind of my point that I came back to after the loss at Iowa, which was, Wisconsin still has big wins early in the season. Those still matter. The loss at Iowa was a quad 1 loss. It's not a bad loss, despite the fact that Iowa is not necessarily an NCAA tournament team this year. And I come back to this because I think it's important to put the season into perspective, that they have still looked solid. That team is still there somewhere, right? It's probably not the high-flying team that won 15 of 17 straight, but there's something 15 of 17 straight, 15 of 17 to start the season. But there is something to this team that is still worth watching and worth seeing if they can find some of that magic that was found at the beginning of the season. And we talked early on, right? This Wisconsin team has one of the best sets of wins in the country. Brendan Harrison, the SID for Sports Information Director for Wisconsin basketball, tweeted out today a thing that I've harkened back to a few times in the last couple of weeks for Wisconsin. That stays true, right? Wisconsin is one of only 6 schools in the country with 11 or more quad 1 and quad 2 wins. Purdue has 15, UConn has 13, and then Wisconsin is tied for third place with 11 with Creighton, Kansas, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. Not tied with itself, but you know what I mean. Of those 4 teams, Creighton, Kansas, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, that are tied for the third most quad 1, quad 2 wins in the country, Wisconsin and Creighton are the only 2 that do not have a loss in quad 3 or quad 4. Wisconsin still has a decent resume, a very good resume, one of the best in the country. Now, at a certain point, the number of losses has to matter. The volume of losses has to matter. I understand that, but the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee released their bracket preview of the top 16 teams in the country this past Saturday, and Wisconsin was standing very solid at 16th in the country. Now, I think that goes to show that if Wisconsin had not been sliding here, we could be really excited right now as fans about Wisconsin having a chance to capture something really magical, hanging out on that 2 line, fighting potentially for for a spot on that one line, because that fourth number one seed spot is very, very, very much up for grabs. I think Purdue, UConn, and Houston have pulled away of the top three, but that fourth spot is really in a league of its own, where it's just going to be a team that is not near the quality of resume, at least, that those top three teams have built. But I think another thing that was interesting is that North Carolina has some losses that are starting to pile up as well. North Carolina has, some not super great losses on the resume, but North Carolina also has some really, really, really solid wins. North Carolina has a win over Tennessee, which is probably going to be a 2 seed, a team that Wisconsin also played. North Carolina has lost to Georgia Tech and to Syracuse, both not very great teams. I want to say, while I'm thinking about it, both teams that are worse than any team at KenPom than Wisconsin has lost to. Not quite. I think Georgia Tech is. I think that's the worst loss of those two teams. Yeah. So North Carolina has, a worse loss on its resume than Wisconsin does. And lots of people were saying, well, we see North Carolina as more of a 3 seed at this point. But North Carolina boasts wins over teams like Duke at home against North Carolina, Tennessee, a win over a decent Florida State team, a win over Clemson. This committee seems to be valuing some of these high-end wins, maybe more than they're scrutinizing the losses as much, right? Wisconsin has the same number of quad 1 and quad 2 wins as North Carolina. North Carolina has, three fewer losses altogether, but North Carolina does have a quad 3 loss on its resume to Georgia Tech. I think it goes to show a little bit of something that this committee is valuing wins. And if that is going to be the case, Wisconsin is going to end up with a solid seed in the NCAA tournament. Now, are they going to slip? That's a real chance. And slipping down to the 5 line is when then you start flirting with Wisconsin being potentially paired in the NCAA tournament against one of these mid-major teams who won their conference tournament, which have a solid resume, although not solid enough to be an at-large bid, but one that's worthy of getting a quite high auto-qual spot to the NCAA tournament. If I were the Wisconsin, I would not want to slip any further than the 4 seed that they are currently projected as. But there's opportunity to stay in that 4 seed and potentially even grab a 3 seed yet. And this is where I want to talk a little bit about the impact of the Maryland game that I think is important here. Today, officially coming into today, Maryland is a quad 2 opportunity for Wisconsin again. But it's kind of a fake quad 2 opportunity because Maryland came into the day ranked 74th in the net in the NCAA evaluation tool rankings, which are used to determine that quad 1, quad 2, quad 3, quad 4 rankings. And 74 is just above the cutoff of 75, that if you get a win over a top 75 team, I think it's 31-75 on your home court, that's a quad 2 win. But if Wisconsin beats Maryland, they very well might slot down beyond that 75 mark. So Wisconsin beating Maryland might actually move Maryland from a quad 2 win down to a quad 3 win. Unfortunately, or fortunately, if you think about it, if Wisconsin loses to Maryland tonight, that could make it a quad 2 win, a quad 2 loss, because Maryland will move up in the net with that win over Wisconsin. So it feels gross. It's a little bit like, well, yeah, Wisconsin lost, but at least then it's, only a quad 2 loss. If Wisconsin wins, it's a little unfortunate. It's at least a little bit of sour taste in your mouth because, well, yeah, they should win. It's only a quad 3 win. So it's a little bit unfortunate that these numbers are shaking out this way for Wisconsin. Meanwhile, you have some other things happening around the net and the rankings where Virginia is playing itself onto the bubble of the NCAA tournament right now. They scored whatever it was, like 40 9 points, 40 something points in a loss, in like a 30-point loss to Virginia Tech the other night. That's not great because that was a really solid win for Wisconsin early on, but Wisconsin has some of these other wins, like over Marquette, that looks really good. Marquette and Tennessee, which are both probably going to be 2 seeds in the NCAA tournament, and Marquette has another opportunity to play UConn in Milwaukee in a week or so here, where I think it's 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks from tomorrow, where Marquette will be able to make a case for a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. But if Marquette were to take that win, so like Wisconsin is going to have a chance here to be able to boast. Oh, sorry, Wisconsin didn't beat Tennessee, but Wisconsin did beat Marquette. Wisconsin will be able to have an opportunity to boast a win over a number 1 seed. They have a respectable loss to what is turning out to be a really high quality Tennessee team, which is doing well for them. Rutgers continues to look better and better, and Wisconsin needs to beat that Rutgers team, right? Ohio State beats Purdue, which is, arguably maybe a little bit better for Wisconsin than just Purdue continuing to roll. It's a little give and take, right? And it's not that Wisconsin totally needs to worry about this. They're not on the bubble. If Wisconsin were to lose 3 of 5 to close the season here, there's a good argument that Wisconsin's on the bubble, especially depending on which of those games Wisconsin loses. But I think it's going to be all right. I think the trick here is that Wisconsin has to beat a Maryland team tonight, which is going to be a tricky win, right? Wisconsin is better than this Maryland team. Wisconsin should beat this Maryland team, but it's not as definitive as it was before. Wisconsin is 19th at KenPom right now. Maryland is 53rd. And the thing with Maryland is that they are a sneaky good defensive team. I mean, really a great defensive team by adjusted efficiency. They have the 6th best defense in the country, according to KenPom. But the other thing is that they boast a pair of players that allows them to kind of go out and make a whole bunch of baskets at certain points in time, boasting Jameer Young, who's going to be a Big Ten first teamer, I think, all Big Ten first teamer in Jameer Young, their excellent point guard, who, I mean, dishes the ball out as well as just about anybody. A really excellent assist rate, one of the best in the country. On top of that, they have just a phenomenal center to pair along with him in Julian Reese. You put Donta Scott at the power forward, matches up against Tyler Wall. He's good at playing in the post. That sometimes they go to a small ball lineup that allows Donta Scott to play at the 5. This is a sneaky Maryland team that could get Wisconsin if the right Wisconsin team does not show up to the Kohl Center tonight. I'm a little bit worried about it because of that fact, where points may be at a premium in this one because Maryland has a solid defense, and the ability for Maryland to turn on the Jets with Jameer Scott, with Donta Scott, with Julian Reese might make it so that Maryland might come out and all of a sudden go on a 10-0 run, and it could be crushing to this Wisconsin team. Getting anyone have Brandon's number? That's not good. Yeah, I think the other thing to note too is that neither one of these teams, Maryland and Wisconsin tonight, are particularly deep, which I think make this, might make this a war of wills at the end of this all. Neither Kevin Willard or Greg Gard play their benches particularly often. They rank 313 and 311 in bench minutes percentage, according to KenPom. So with Wisconsin having Kamari McGee still out of the lineup and Isaac Lindsey out of the lineup tonight, according to the Big Ten availability reports, this could be, testing the backcourt depth again for Wisconsin, especially if somebody like Max Klesmit or Chucky Hepburn gets an early foul trouble all over again. The one thing that might save Wisconsin from a fate like that is, can you limit the ability of Jameer Young and Julian Reese to get involved, because those two guys draw fouls like, almost no other. They are really good at drawing fouls. I mean, Jameer Young is just such a dynamic point guard, and he draws fouls at an excellent rate, and he's a top 10 free throw shooter in the country. This Maryland team is a top 10 free throw shooting team in the country. So if this comes down to it, somebody's going to have to make the free throws, and it's going to be a difficult game. I think the one thing Wisconsin really has going for it is the fact that Maryland does not shoot the three very well at all. Jameer Young is barely above 35% on his 3-point shooting, and he's the best 3-point shooter by percentage of shots made on the entire team. So should be tough for Wisconsin tonight. I think a little bit of a sneaky matchup for them for that reason. Maryland has a good defense, and Maryland can score points. Their offensive efficiency is, doesn't look like anything to boast with, but if they get that high-end talent going that they have on the roster, it could be tough for Wisconsin to stop. And if Wisconsin gets into foul trouble, they really might be toast just because of the depth and because of what an elite clip Maryland shoots those free throws at. So I think it's going to do it for today's episode of the Scotty Six Pack Podcast. Thank you very, very much for listening on your podcast platform of choice. While you're here, leave a kind review, 5 stars, kind comments really does help other people find the show. You can also watch us on YouTube, youtube.com/@Scotty6Pack. While you're there, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notified as soon as we put new episodes in your feed. I've been your host, Kendrick Stumbers. You can find me on the website formerly known as Twitter @Kendrick Stumbers, and follow the podcast @Scotty6Pack for the latest updates in Wisconsin sports on Wisconsin.